Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about the recent changes to the Queensland planning codes by the state government and inevitably by the local governments to deal with, changes to secondary dwellings and also housing, the definition of a household in order to deal with the household crisis that we've got with housing affordability and lack of supply and a whole bunch more. And in order to talk to this today, we've got a good friend of mine, Vu Nguyen from Town Planning Alliance. Hey, Vu, how are you?
Hey, Rob. Not too bad. How are you?
Not too bad, mate. You did a recent presentation on this for us not too long ago. I guess when it was fresh off the stand, and it's had a little bit of time to bake in now. And no doubt there are plenty of learnings that are going to come from this. But I guess let's paint the scene for everybody and kind of go back and go. We're talking about a housing crisis. Let's kind of set the scene and say, well, how big is this housing crisis? Everyone's talking about, not enough supply and things costing too much and rents going up and a whole bunch more. But have we got some numbers that sit behind this, mate?
Yeah. So look, certainly when I presented to your group, and thank you for having me on again, Rob. When we presented to your group, what we saw there was the research we found that in terms of the housing supply, and rental rates across the nation, rents were surging by circa 23%. But when you compare and contrast that to Southeast Queensland and Brisbane specifically, which was increasing above 34%, it shows that the housing supply issue we had nationally was heightened in Queensland, specifically SEQ or Southeast Queensland in that respect. So in response to that, what we saw was really strong recognition from all three levels of government that there needed something to be done. And at a state level, our leaders in the state took the baton and ran with that at the time. And what we saw was on the 16th of September, if memory serves me correct, last year, they had the Queensland Housing Roundtable. Now, that was a really good step in the path forward for us as a state because and I say this on a personal level, I've done this for a while, and it's not often I see all three levels of government aligned and in agreement with a single problem. And in this instance, to see all three levels of government accept there was a housing supply issue was comforting, particularly for us as practitioners in the property space. So we had this roundtable on the 16th of September. Now, that roundtable gave rise to the Housing Summit that was convened by the Premier on the 20th of October. Now, the key thing you see there, and the reason why I raise those two dates, is the fact that, we all sit and joke about how slow government bureaucracies operate. The mere fact that we've got a state government who had a roundtable on the 16th, and less than a month later, they had their summit, really showed how serious this state government was and how fast they were intending to move to address the issue. So that was the first piece of comfort that we drew, that our elected representatives were prepared to move fast. So that was the background, Rob, in terms of we all know there was a housing crisis and the state took the reins and ran with it and had the housing summit / roundtable. And off the back of that, a whole suite of recommendations were made. But more specifically for today, one of those first levers that first levers or triggers that the state pulled was in relation to granny flats, Fonzie flats, secondary dwellings, call them what you will. But at a headline, the state, as their first response was to say, hey, look, if you've got a secondary dwelling, granny flat, Fonzie flat, if you've had limitations about what the household mix looked like, we're taking that away. We're taking it off the table. So you're no longer bound by population limits on your secondary dwellings. And the idea for that was to free up a lot more dormant housing to meet the market.
It's probably worthwhile painting the picture. When you say population limits, there was a definition of a household that said no more than 5 people and tied the two dwellings into one household so that you could only have 5 unrelated people between the two.
Indeed, Brisbane at the time had a limit within the house code that said, if you're related by blood and there's 40 of you, knock yourself out. But if you're not related by blood, 5's your magic number. Other councils had other types of limitations, i.e. you had to be related in order to occupy that. It gives rise to the term granny flat. So you could be granny, but you couldn't be Fonzie because you weren't related in some cases, if that makes sense. All that got pulled away to release some more housing supply. How they pulled it away was a few months of chaos for us as industry professionals on how we implemented or how we received information, applied it with our related professionals such as certifiers, architects, and even councils to that extent. Weird, wonderful time, Rob. I think we got through it and a lot of learnings through all of it. But I think when we look back, I think really whether it was positive or not, we really got to accept the fact that at least our government representatives across all three levels recognise there's a need for housing supply. But we can talk about housing diversity as well at the same time if you wanted to, because I know that's your hobby horse.
Oh, there's plenty of time. It's a big show. Don't you worry. I'm just going to grab one little morsel there that you threw out there. The Fonzie flat. A lot of people haven't heard of the Fonz. You and I are older to remember Happy Days.
I'm probably showing you my age, yes.
So the Happy Days is an old show, folks, that had a guy called the Fonz who lived above the garage. And so it is colloquially referred to that, but not all the way around the country, mate. So a lot of people don't know what the Fonzie flat is. But...
I reckon a fair few of us on this call would have been fans of Happy Days. We all wanted to be the Fonz at one time or another, Rob, but that's another conversation.
Yes,
back to the point.
So I guess, where were we? So secondary dwellings. So let's start with what is a secondary dwelling?
Yeah. I mean, in conventional terms, a secondary dwelling has multiple terms, like they're called granny flats, Fonzie flats, auxiliary units, and the like. But physically, a secondary dwelling is exactly that. It's a dwelling that is secondary to the primary house. Typically, they are either attached or detached. And if they're detached, they're within close proximity to the primary dwelling. But ultimately, that is exactly what it is. It's a secondary. It's secondary. It's meant to be subordinate to the primary house. What it's not, and probably I think it's important that we caveat this, Rob, and discuss what is not a secondary dwelling. A dual occupancy is not a secondary dwelling. The distinction there is a dual occupancy is a recognised land use that would suggest both dual being two are of equal size, shape, or scale, but importantly, both could be separated and sold separately. So create a separate title, sell them separately. A secondary dwelling cannot be sold without its primary dwelling together. So it's important to note that what is not a secondary dwelling as much as what is a secondary dwelling.
Yeah, so the two dwellings on the one title.
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess the potential for that, would be, additional revenue streams by being able to rent them out to different households and a whole bunch of things like that. But the way that the legislation was previously, granny flat had to be occupied by granny in many of the councils, and granny might live there for a while, but granny ain't living forever. So eventually,
but that's the truth of it, Rob. A lot of these people built granny her flat, and granny passed on. And while council said it's granny or bust, these things sat dormant, right? We as professionals saw ourselves where people rented them out, but were getting show cause enforcement action taken against them because it wasn't granny living there. These changes alleviate that. So that's the positive out of all that. Yeah.
And I guess there's obviously some limitations in regards to the size of that dwelling, so that it's not going to be a second house. It is really, in some councils they're limiting to about 80 odd square meters, but it's slightly different in each council, as I understand it.
Indeed, yes, yeah. So, and that's the important thing to remember in all this. If you're thinking of going out there and banging up secondary dwellings to your heart's content, we still need to recognise that in Queensland, I think last count there's 90 odd councils, 90 odd plus councils. So there's going to be 90 odd town plans, 90 odd different sets of rules. All right. And each council will have different criteria of what they will allow for secondary dwelling. So the important thing is this: the state takes away the user mix the population mix, the household mix. It doesn't take away the size, location, design attributes. That still lies with council. So some councils will allow you a secondary dwelling upwards of 80 square metres of gross floor area. That's a term in terms of the floor area. Some councils will give you 50 or 60 square metres. Some councils will call for additional car parking. Some won't. So the point I'm making here, Rob, is that the state changes were to do with the occupancy mix, not the built form. You still got to respect the council requirements with regarding built form.
Yeah, you touched on 90 odd councils in Queensland. There's 537 councils in Australia, mate, and trying to run this network and deal with all of that is just a headache, let me tell you. Which is one of the reasons why we ask all of our audience to start specialising on one council to get to know that really, really well. So now the second thing that that task force came up with was the removal of development approval triggers for the new households in a residential zone.
Yeah, and I think I should explain how we arrived at that. So let's just take a step back and what I suggested before. And this is where often government agencies have great ideas and they implement them, but sometimes the detail is lacking and it gets found out post-implementation. So I'll give you an example of what we saw here, right? So the state pulls the first lever and says, secondary dwellings don't have a population cap anymore, in simple terms. Okay, great. But if you use Brisbane as an example, and you know, I said before, you still have to respect the council design guidelines. Within council's design guidelines, there was embedded in there no more than 5-person rule. So on one hand, the state says, yep, no worries. The other hand, because you offended that 5-person rule, it triggered the need for planning approval. So you had this tension between state saying, go, 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 council saying, yeah, we can go with you, but we need to see a DA for each of these granny flats if it's going to be more than 5 people. So they all sit and go, well, what do we do now? So the response to what do we do now is the state says, light bulb moment, let's make material change of uses for houses immune from applications. Now, I'll unpack the material change of use thing. I know it's a Queensland-centric thing. But the idea was to make house applications, in most instances, not all instances, immune from a DA or planning approval to break through that disconnect, as an example I gave you before. So the second lever the state pulled was material change of uses for houses won't trigger a DA in most instances. Now, again, devil in the detail. So they say you won't need a DA unless you're in a relevant overlay, bushfire, flooding, etc.
Yep.
Or the exemption doesn't apply to you if you're doing a basement car park or an underground car park. Now, can I just say, I'm not the smartest bloke going around, Rob, but I still don't understand how a basement car park has implications of why you need a DA or not. Maybe something to do with the water table, but that's one of the triggers that pushes you outside of the exemptions, right? So it's been an interesting little journey for us, but some of these things, and I can use today as an example of how, and this is not a pot shot at government, it's just how we as the end users of these changes deal with them. And I'll give you an example. You know, I talk about that exclusion where they say house doesn't need a DA provided you're not in a relevant overlay. So I'm not flooded, not bushfire, etc. And provided you don't have a basement car park or an underground car park. So, you know, I don't have a basement car park, but I have a carport that I've dug into the ground because my land's not flat. I've dug into the ground by about 300 mil to flatten it out. Some councils will say, well, that carport's not on ground, it's underground. Triggers a DA. All right. So you see how those little nuances are still there. They just need to be resolved and remedied. But as with all things, and particularly when things are moving at a rapid rate, you've got to accept what you've got and just work with it, you know. But and that's what we've had to do.
Yeah, and I guess that creates a side topic, which is, you know, when every single council is writing their own sets of rules and we're not standardizing on any of those rules. You know, I see pretty much all of the other states have standardized on at least their terminology and at least their zoning size and at least the definition of certain things. You know, Queensland is somewhat lacking in the fact that there are many, many variations of zonings and.
I shouldn't be too critical about that, Rob, given that's how I make my living. But if I could use an example for you, and I'm speaking to you as a friend here. I should be more cognizant that there's people listening. But I use as an example, right? The exemption says, if you're in simple terms, if you're a material change of use for a house in a residential zone, you don't need a DA. Just take that as in its simplest term, if you will. Now, it's about this term material change of use, right? So to your point, in Queensland, we do have standard terms. We do have standard interpretations. We just have non-standard people, right? And what I mean by that,
you gave me some examples of that before, so
I'm going to go there now for you.
So what I mean, the differences between that.
Well, yeah. So I'll give you an example. Brisbane City Council will say, if you have a vacant block of land and you are proposing a new house, we deem that to be a material change of use because it's an intensity of the use. So therefore, you fall within that exemption, right?
So let's because we did catch on material change of use definition before, but let's just replay that for everyone. So change in intensity and a change
or a introduction of a new use. So correct. The definition of material change of use is an increase in intensity or an introduction of a new use.
So in that instance,
you've gone from vacant,
gone from zero people to however many people, and it's gone from vacant land to a house. So technically, it's an MCU.
However, in Brisbane, if you have a 3-bedroom house and you do an extension to put 16 bedrooms on, because I have a big family, that's not a material change of use. That is building work.
But it is a change of intensity. Don't
ask me. I'm just telling you how things are interpreted differently. Now, we're not going to spend our time sort of picking apart Brisbane, but let's just use Noosa. Actually, let's look at Gold Coast City Council before we go north. Gold Coast City Council takes it the other way. Gold Coast City Council says if you have a 3-bedroom house and you're putting an extension on for a 4th bedroom, we deem that to be a material change of use. So you can see how a council, not very far apart, takes a house extension very differently. Noosa, let's go to the other side of the coast. Let's go from one water side to the other side. Noosa says if you've got a vacant block and you put a new house on it, that's not a material change of use. That's building work because Noosa says there was a house there before. Therefore, you haven't changed the use, nor have you increased it. So I can cast the net across those 3 councils, and I've got 3 very differing approaches to this term material change of use versus building work. Now, I unpack that because it's important because the state government only exempts material change of uses, not building works. So we're still seeing DAs for building works. Okay. Now, can I also add though, Rob, be cautious that don't run madly down the street going, yay, I can build my house without the need for respecting council planning rules. Not the case. So at the same time, they introduced differing pathways that said, if you are activating this exemption against the material change of use, you still need to pay respect to the council plans or the council town plan through a siting variation for amenity and aesthetics. So that's just a different way to bring the town plan or give the town plan teeth. So you're not exactly bypassing the town plan. You're simply paying me to lodge an application under a different format. It's still with council. They're still going to assess it. They're still going to test you against the town plan. It's just called a siting variation, not a development application. All right. But I raise that as an example because when the policy was changed, when the lever was pulled, a lot of certifiers, a lot of planners, a lot of us industry professionals were scratching their head going, what does that mean? You know, so there are certifiers out there who said, well, no, MCU doesn't need DA. I'm only going to assess you against the building code, not even the town plan. Thankfully, that's since been resolved, and that's not the case. But there was a small window there where some certifiers took that attitude. Dangerous.
And how many 3-bedroom houses actually got approved? and are those approvals valid?
Oh, look, I won't put my bush lawyer hat on, Rob, but wow, we as a collective group in our office sort of were thinking it could blow up, and if it blows up, it would blow up pretty bad.
Yeah.
So and thankfully in these instances, what you've got to do, and I know often people have a dim view of government agencies. You've just got to work with them. What we did as a practice, we engaged heavily with our key councils that we work with, and accepting that all these councils look at things differently. We just created a cheat sheet. We know that Brisbane's talking to them. We know we're going to do it this way for them. Talking to our counterparts in Gold Coast, we know we're going to do it this way for those guys. So I guess the point I'm saying is through all these changes, rather than sit there and whinge and whine and sort of throw your toys out of the cot, we just doubled down, dialed up our engagement with the government agencies and gone, how do you want to deal with this? We're not going to change the rules. We don't have the authority to. We'll just work with you guys so our clients get the best benefit out of the process. And that's what we spent the last 6 months doing, basically.
Yeah.
It's because you're not going to change the rules by yourself. You just got to work. With
No,
it.
but by having conversations like this and airing the fact that there are differences and that sort of thing makes the awareness out there, and hopefully someone out there actually listens, and who knows.
Yeah. But I think at the same time that we got to remind ourselves, as sometimes as frustrating as these quick changes are, we got to accept why they're being made. They're being made in response to a housing shortage crisis, a housing crisis. That's not a small thing. That's not something to be trivial about. So, and I say to my team, as frustrating as these rapid fire changes are, why they're being made. Because I've got young guys in my office, I've got old people in my office. It's housing supply and affordability and diversity are big issues that affects everyone at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you've commented on a lot of that, but what are some of the other issues that we've seen as a byproduct of this? So you just touched on the fact that the public's not even aware of whether it's going to be a development approval or not that's actually going to be required.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time. The public, I think the best I can say to the property industry, particularly in this sector, talk to your town planner. Let us weave our way through, because we'll customise our advice based on which council you work in. But the other changes, things that we've seen personally on our end as a result of these changes are, for instance, some councils have come out and said, hey, listen, because of this, that secondary dwelling is functioning like as if it's a dual occupancy, albeit you can't sell them separately. Therefore, we're going to hit you with developer contributions, infrastructure charges in Queensland speak, right? And they're not cheap. So we're seeing some councils apply them, right? So you got to factor that into your bottom line. Some other things we've seen, you've got to be respectful to your historical approvals. So for instance, I'll give you an example. We had a client who had an existing granny flat. The granny flat was built off the back of a historical planning approval, a historical DA. That historical DA had a condition of approval that said, thou shalt not have more than 5 unrelated people on site, because that's what the town plan said at the time when they applied for it. That condition is still live, valid and active and applicable on that land because they've acted on their approval, despite what happens with the state changes, right? Yeah. So we've had to go back and unwind that by modifying their approval, Rob, so that it falls in line with the current state changes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I use that as an example that if you've got an existing granny flat, spend a bit of time checking your historical permits to make sure you're not offending any of the obligations under those historical permits.
Well, now's the time to refresh that. Now
it is.
And more specifically, and I don't think we touched on this, but that change to the secondary dwelling ruling is only got a temporary lifespan at this point.
Well, the state government have committed to a review in 3 years. Okay, I think that's a good move, but I don't know. No one here knows what's going to happen in 3 years. Will they say, yeah, we're going to unwind that piece of legislation because we've achieved housing supply elsewhere? I don't know. But it begs a question, doesn't it? That if you've got a secondary dwelling built today under these provisions without a population cap, call it that, or a site cap, and they unwind these rules, are you liable? Are you obliged to the new rules? I have a personal view to that if you are an established lawful use, then you're protected from that. But I'm not a lawyer, but that's certainly in our work. If you're an existing lawful use and you've maintained that lawful use and you haven't ceased those use rights, then you should be entitled for them going forward, regardless of what legislation changes are out there. But
it's the exact same argument that you just said 2 minutes ago, which is somebody's got an existing lawful use saying 5, and that's restriction stays alive forever. You go, why would the new one not stay alive, even though it was only temporarily implemented? So,
but all the more reason to unwind that 5-person criteria on that
do it now.
specific case.
Give Vu some business. He's got no trade at the
moment. We're just a struggling suburban town planner, Rob. That's we're always open for more business. Put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But so there's been some changes, and they're the implications we've seen.
So, what do you think is the likely outcome at the end of that 3-year review? Like crystal ball, I rub my crystal ball right now. I don't think in 3 years we're going to solve any housing crisis at all.
No.
I don't think
if you're asking me crystal ball, then I'm going to have a punt here, right? And my response to you is I'm going to pretend to be a politician. Okay, if you just humor me here, Rob. If I'm the politician who unwinds those rules, can you imagine the amount of stories on Tracy Grimshaw, Current Affair, of families having to be made homeless because they can no longer live in that granny flat that they've been living in for the last 3 years?
Yeah. Tracy's retired, mate, but I get the idea.
I don't watch a Current Affair, so you get the idea. I don't have time to watch TV.
The idea. So it's the Current Affair factor. That's no politician wants to actually have that and be the one responsible for that.
And look, you got to go back to, and I had some numbers here, right? Let's talk 3 years. So the numbers I've got here between 2011 and 2021. Southeast Queensland population grew by roughly 750,000 people, right? We're looking at between now and 2027 an additional 380,000 homes needed for our target population, roughly 5.7 million.
Yeah.
Right? So 3 years, and in a development space, 3 years is not a long time. By the time you step through your design process, building approvals, planning approvals, and build these things, we're not going to plug that gap. We're not going to get to 3 years and go, great, we got enough keys in the city now. We don't need, the issue's gone away. It doesn't work like that. So if I'm a betting man, I think that a lot of these changes, if done well, if implemented well by mums and dads and the property sector, I can't see any reason why they shouldn't stay.
No, absolutely. So what about some of the other, I guess, realities to these amendments? What do you see as the real life implications of that when people are going through both the application process, the usage case? How long is it taking? The fact that this has taken 6 months or so now to bed in, are there lessons that have come out of all of that?
Yeah, I think the shakedown period has come and gone, Rob. In my opinion, engaging by the work we're doing, that the industry's found its groove, and ironically, the groove is business as usual. And what I mean by that is that with those changes, you're still having to respect the planning scheme. We're still making applications, but you don't comply with the planning scheme. It's just called something different. It's an amenity and aesthetics application referral versus a DA. So it's business as usual in that sense. What it's done, it's really put in the forefront of people's mind housing supply, housing diversity, housing choice as a key thing. You go to the odd barbecue now, and where there used to be a lot of talk about which school you're sending your kid to, a lot of it's now about housing supply and whatnot, which is good. It's put in the forefront, right? It's made us more aware of how important it is that differing levels of government talk to each other. And I think at the same time, differing levels of government need to seek feedback from the industry as well. And when I say seek feedback from the industry, I'm not talking about talking to the big end of town or the main players is one thing. You've got to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, right? You got to talk to the mums and dads. You got to talk to the suburban guys, right? Because end of the day, and it's like this, in my opinion, right? Your suburban mum and dad plumber isn't getting a gig on Queen's Wharf. Your suburban mum and dad, their bread and butter, their wheelhouse is granny flats, houses, townhouses, right?
It's the stuff our community builds, mate. That's
correct.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that when a government commits to industry feedback, it commits to industry feedback from all of industry, not just the prominent industry.
Yeah. The challenge in regards to that is the fact that there is no industry body for small-scale mum and dad developers, and yet I saw a presentation from Brisbane City Council, and I won't name who it was. I know who it was, but I won't name them. That presented some stats saying that 85 to 90% of all development applications into council were 6 packs and below, which is the small-scale mum and dad developer,
Yes.
and yet there is no industry body that represents them. So where there are opportunities, I gladly offer our network for those conversations to actually take place. The recent challenges with regards to, does a developer need a license? We rallied the troops, and I think they got a good 200 or 300 applications from our community. Trying to say, hey, you're going to destroy the entire ecosystem if you do things like that.
But I think it's I get why councils and state governments and federal governments do what they do. I think it's incumbent upon our side of the table, though, Rob, to make sure that we're doing good quality outcomes, because and I use the townhouse situation in Brisbane as an example, right? I know townhouses in Brisbane can be seen as a dirty word sometimes, but I get it's a dirty word because there's just a lot of rubbish outcomes, to be fair. For every really good quality outcome, there's probably 2 bad ones. So the more good ones you put out there, the less likely they become talking points for negative talking points, I should say. So, I mean, it's still on us, to get it done right, to do it properly, and therefore it gives councils no reason not to support it in that respect. I think we're digressing here, but I'm happy to keep digressing if you want to.
No, let's go down the rabbit hole, mate.
It's not even beer o'clock yet, but let's do it. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
So where do you want to? Which rabbit hole do you want to talk about, Rob? Let's go.
Well, housing diversity, like you touched on it. There was and I'll name it so you don't have to keep your politics alive for your business. The Brisbane, the future, the blueprint. I'm trying to think what
blueprint.
The blueprint decimated, I guess, the possibility to put townhouses in the Brisbane City Council area, which has completely. I'm sure that you can give me some stats with regards to the applications you're seeing, but we can't get deals to stack anymore because you lose an entire dwelling by the time you put your extra car parking and your extra garden space and townhouses.
I think there's a few. Your comment there touches on a few things, Rob, and I'll start from one end. I know you mentioned Brisbane, so let's talk about Brisbane, right? So, when they first introduced this current city plan back in 2014, and even the city plan before that, it allowed you to do townhouses in low density zone at a certain scale if you met a certain attributes, right? So the townhouses in low density was not a new thing to the city plan. It was embedded in the previous town plan. But like I said before, some people do things really well and some people do things not so well. And the not so well ones caught the attention, caused a lot of community angst. And as a result, Brisbane took the view that we don't want to be there anymore and we can meet our housing supply via vertical product, right? That's fine. I get that. But as a user and a practitioner, this is my view, right? When you take out townhouses in suburbia out of low density, what it does, it forces you into house and land or a vertical unit or a 4-pack in a low medium density zone, right? The issue is this, and I use, for example, I'll use my family as an example. I'm a young family, 2 young girls. My kids spend their time on the iPad or the pool. All right, I have 600 square meters. iPad or pool. All right, so I could live in a townhouse, but I need to find a townhouse that has got good enough communal amenity that has the pool and all those sorts of things. Now, you don't find that product in a 4-pack or a 6-pack.
You can't.
Developers will tell you need the critical mass. You need a 20-pack to be able to afford the quality of common amenity, communal amenity, right? But by taking that off the table, you've taken a very key part of a key product type off the table. You know, I've got 600 square meters. I don't want to race back from the beach on a Sunday afternoon and mow my lawn. But if I want to live, my life could be lived in a townhouse, except the offering is not, the products are not there, or not there anymore, I should say. So that leads itself to, you go, we talk a lot here about housing supply and housing crisis, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that there's housing choice, housing diversity. And there's something in that, Rob. Like, I'll give you an example, right? If you're a 75-year-old couple living in a scrambling, sprawling 4-bedroom house in middle ring, inner ring, Brisbane, you want to right size, but if the product types aren't there for you in your suburb, you're going to stay in your house, which clogs up housing supply.
Yeah.
Right? If we can get more housing diversity so people can move out of their houses into right-sized homes, it frees up more right-sized homes for other families. So I think I think housing supply is one thing, but we need to look into the housing choice, housing type conversation as well.
Yeah, and I think that outcome that you just commented on there really comes from went out to the community, and they asked for consultation. When they went out to the community for their feedback, I think they asked the wrong question. What they asked is, what are the things that you don't like about developments, and what are instead of saying, where do you think you're going to live in 5 and 10, 20 years time? What does that look like? What would you like that to actually look like? That's the right question. I think that's what completely got missed. As property developers, we don't rape and pillage the earth. Well, not all of us, but we are the makers of community. We actually have to understand the needs of our community and what we're trying to create. And it's only understanding that need that the demand actually gets taken up. So, I think they completely missed the point on that one. But
without getting into the politics of it, I'll step around that issue, and I'll say as a town planner, as a planning professional, housing supply is important, but equally as important is housing diversity, housing choice,
and affordability comes with that.
Absolutely.
As a byproduct of that, because not everyone can afford, vertical living. The higher you go, gets more expensive. So not everyone can afford to live on the ground floor.
But you use as an example, and we all know people, like my parents, for instance, they're elderly. They live in a home on a large parcel of land in middle suburban Brisbane. There's no need for them to be there. But at the same time, they don't want to be displaced out of the community they've been in there for the last 30 years. But because they're in middle suburban Brisbane, in their suburb, there's no other product types bar house and land. So why would you go from one house and land to another house and land? If there's more appropriate right-sized accommodation in that suburb, they'd probably make the switch.
Yeah,
right.
You want to be where your family is. You want to be where you grow up.
And when they make that switch, it frees up their house for a family who will take advantage of the 5 bedrooms, will take advantage of the lawn and the yard. And that brings the pressure, takes the pressure out of it. If you did that, multiply that by 10,000 times, it takes the pressure off, right? So the housing choice by default can assist in housing supply and housing pressure. And I use my parents as an example of that, right? So that's why I say to you, in this whole thing about housing supply, it's important, but don't take our eye off the housing choice conversation as well.
Yeah.
Housing diversity.
So in summary, mate, in wrapping all of that up, good outcomes, I guess the changes that they put in place.
Look, yes, well-intentioned. They got the right idea. I don't think anyone would disagree that responding to the housing supply is the wrong thing. I think when you look back, you go, could there have been a bit more coordination between state and council? Of course there could be. But at the same time, I think the industry's got itself settled in that sense. So I'm just pleased that they recognise the issue and they're doing something about it, Rob. Interesting, turbulent 2, 3, 4 months of our professional careers, but I think the dust has settled in that respect. Yeah.
And if you had your chance to actually, I guess, be chairing that, I guess, housing summit, what additional things might you have considered in that process?
I mean, the housing summit, you got to step back from the secondary dwelling conversation we're having here, right? You look at the bigger picture, right? And you can see, and these councils are making the right moves. Some councils would choose to meet their supply vertically. Some councils would choose to meet the supply horizontally, right? But at least they're choosing to meet the challenge. But if I was there, I'd also probably just instill in there the obligation for the housing choice, the housing diversity. I know you can get the sense it's a bit of my hobby horse, Rob, how I'm speaking a bit about it.
I'm trying to give you some rope, mate.
I'm speaking about it a bit more passionately than I am about the secondary dwellings 37 minutes ago. But I think if you ask me if it was me, I'll be saying, guys, yes, housing supply by numbers is one thing. Housing choice, housing diversity also aids and abets housing supply. So give that the equal respect to each of you councils. Give that the respect it needs. And I'm not saying that as a veiled way of getting townhouses back. No. I mean, we do a lot of work in the seniors accommodation. It's the same principles. If you give people housing choice, they'll opt out of their inappropriate housing to free that up for someone else. Right?
Yeah.
It's the basics. We see that across all planes. So yeah, if to answer your question, at a micro scale for the secondary dwelling thing, I would have encouraged a bit more coordination, communication between the two levels of government. At a broader macro, yeah, let's keep driving this supply issue, but also integrate the diversity housing choice into it as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, agreed. So, mate, it's been a pleasure as always. I will remind everyone that if they want to see your old presentation, they can become an annual member in our community. They can have a look at the old recordings. You only did that a couple of months ago, but I guess what you went into today, plus a little bit more, plus we run these events all the way around the country. So if anyone wants to, I guess, become an annual member, they can go to our Developer Network website and join there, or alternatively, just come to one of our events. We now run these in 4 states, mate: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. So I'm flying to downtown Adelaide tomorrow. So run our second event there. So if anyone wants to come to those events, I'm just trying to get the button up to say that exactly right now. I hate button pushing. So if you want to come to those, make sure that you RSVP first and actually come along. Got a cracking presentation in South Australia. South Australia have just gone through a whole state government reform for their town planning in the last, I guess, 2 years, and have been rolling that out. So we're getting a little bit of a review on how that's going there. So if anyone wants to know all about town planning, this is the place to be. Mate, Vu, it's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries,
We'll catch up with you for a beer, no doubt, in the not too distant future.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers, mate. See ya.